Okay, we've hit the button. We're live. Awesome. Okay, hope everyone can hear us, can see us. Mike, welcome to the show. First time. How are you doing today?
Absolutely wonderful. Thank you for inviting me to be on your show.
Yeah, excited to have you. And Alex, welcome back.
Thank
Happy to have you.
you. Missed you guys last week.
We missed you too. All right, let's kick off. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, solutions on how you can unlock your cost optimization at AWS. I'm your host, Stephanie Gooch. With me today is my co-host, Alex Head, and our special guest today, Mike Rosenberg. Welcome, Mike.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon.
So hopefully you guys heard last week, we're going to be talking about unit costs today. And if you don't know what that is, then don't worry, stick around. We will be explaining what it is, how to work it out, and why it's important. We've got two experts with me today. As always, any questions, comments, please throw them in the chat. We love to hear from you, and we want to hear what's going on. If you have any general questions about cost optimization, please let us know. So last time, well, generally, we know this is a 30-minute show and we want to kind of get into it as soon as possible. But to give our guests a little bit of time to explain who they are, we're going to start calling this the 1-minute origin story. So I want to hear from Mike, what's your background? What do you do at AWS? Just a little bit of information in kind of under a minute.
Fantastic. So my background is I've been both a developer, an accountant, and a CFO. I like to tell everybody I speak both debits and credits and bits and bytes, and I can translate between the two languages. At Amazon, I'm a member of the cloud economics team. My area of specialty is cloud financial management. I help our customers with issues related to forecast, budgets, cost optimization, governance, and basically how to get the most business value for your spend on AWS.
Nice and quick as well. I like it. All right, so let's get into it. In layman's terms, Mike, why don't you take this? What is unit cost?
Unit cost is the incremental cost of doing the next unit of business. So if you are in manufacturing, you may know this as a marginal cost or the cost on a bill of materials. In accounting, it's marginal. It's straight up marginal cost is how an accountant would refer to it. In the cloud, you want to tie your usage to the business drivers. Number of active customers you're serving in a day or a month, the number of licensed seats, the number of gigabyte seconds of video you're streaming. And you want to frame both your cost and your consumption in terms of that demand driver. And like for today, we'll use as an example, an active customer per month. So if I understand my cost per customer and my usage per customer of my AWS services, I can make better engineering and financial decisions to benefit my product and the organization as a whole. And the unit cost is, to me, the bedrock of being able to forecast in a variable consumption environment. And it's an incredibly important concept I'd like to educate everybody about today.
Good. Alex, I mean, you must have spoken to customers about this all the time.
Yes.
How do you normally
I have lots of questions for
please,
you, Mike.
Bring them.
Go on, Alex.
Yeah, so Mike, I think I've told you this in the past, but my background originally worked with AWS at the Weather Channel, and unit cost was a hot topic. I think it's a hot topic with any consumer market. And the biggest challenge that I saw from that standpoint, and also working with customers now, is merging those data sources. So defining a unit that you can actually track, right? Like, how do you know, we could say for this, like the amount of people viewing our stream and the cost of that. So what advice do you give to customers, or, have you done in the past to help people define that and also define the data source that it's going to come from?
So first, you start with a demand driver. So if you view your numerator as either your cost or your consumption in gigabytes or EC2 hours, and your denominator is your unit of demand per customer per second of streaming video. You want to ensure that your demand driver has a high statistical correlation to your AWS usage. The more of that demand driver I get, the more customers, the more resources I consume, and the bigger my bill. The fewer customers, my resources and consumption and spend go down. And you can do that, I always say I'm not a statistician by trade or training. Make friends with an actuary, make friends with a data scientist. There are mathematical models, a Pearson a correlation coefficient, or R squared as it's more commonly known, that you can calculate to find out which are the best ones for your products and services. So, basic guidance is do the math and let the data decide what is going to be the best driver for your situation.
Great point.
Yes, lots of testing, right? So no, don't just go with the first choice. I think that's the tricky part.
Well,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
for some folks, it's obvious. If you're a one-line business or you're serving one product, you could have one. I'll give an example. Let's say you take a big, like an Airbnb, a hosting service. You may have multiple unit costs within your product, a cost to list, a cost to search, and a cost to book. And the combinations of those unit costs together will make up your product cost. But your product is made up of three distinct, separate services, behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Cool. So let's bring it back to the cloud and bring it back to
real quick. I have to do a shout out real quick. You called out Airbnb, and they just released a blog post that our team was mentioned, and so Steph's going to drop it in the comments for our viewers to see. It's on Medium.
Great shout out, great point. Good choice of that wasn't prompted also anybody.
No, that was
just
totally
Mike's
random.
example.
That's awesome.
We'll share that. So just bringing it back to AWS itself. So how would you guys suggest that customers actually work these things out using the data that we have available to them? So would it be things like the CUR, or are there other metrics involved that they need to bring in?
Well, your cost and usage data is quite obviously going to come through AWS, whether you're doing it in Cost Explorer, the CUR, or you have a third-party tool. It really doesn't matter. Where you're going to have to do a little bit of work is on the side of, what is my demand driver? How do I source it? How do I count it? And how do I manage it? Because you do have to work and play well with accounting to ensure that the process of counting your denominator, your demand driver, lines up with the period of time where you're measuring your numerator. So there's some coordination and effort required. And for many folks, if you count these items, like let's say you have a service that scans S3 objects for malware and other malicious actors inside there. So you could, your denominator is going to be your API responses. And I always caution people, never count calls to your API, because it's the response that delivers value to the customer, and the customer's paying for value. So if you have a call that doesn't run the whole system and give the return, you don't want to count it. So you can get your data within, but it's usually going to come from some system you own and operate that is separate and distinct from cost and usage data inside of AWS.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Alex, how would you often recommend people work it out?
Yeah, to me, I think that's one of the biggest challenges that we get, right? Like that's the biggest barrier to entry of defining that other data source and where that's going to come from. And of course, it's different for every customer, every
Absolutely.
user. But I'd say we found some luck with some of our customers to help kind of get used to that unit cost conversation is finding some efficiency unit cost metrics within AWS to start tracking, and then see that impact, and then really increase the momentum around bringing in that next data source. So as an example, like on our team, we a lot of times track compute unit costs. So like looking across all the hours and what the average hour cost you, because no matter if you're spinning a ton up or down, that'll be an efficiency metric. And for us, that's helped a lot, getting that conversation of unit metrics and thinking in that way going. And then people move quicker when it comes to, all right, what other data source can we bring in here? This is an exciting way to look at things.
Oh, absolutely correct. And most folks start with, cost per gigabyte to store data per month, EC2, either spend in total, per, or even on a core basis. And then the journey needs to transition over to finding that demand driver. Because what's really important about having a unit cost is it gives context to your AWS bill. It is my experience in working with customers, and having been a customer myself, is that when you see the bill go up, that's a bad thing. If your bill's going up and your unit costs are holding flat or shrinking over that same period of time, you're running more volume through your system. It's okay for that bill to go up. You're doing more business and you're generating more cost and usage because you're running more customers or more services through your systems. And that helps you add that context. If you just look at the number, I paid this much last month and this much more this month, without unit cost or some other point of reference, you don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. If your bill goes up this month as compared to last month and your unit costs are going up, now it's time. That's a signal and a flag to start. I've got to dive deep and figure out what are the reasons behind that variance, and start doing the research and the the analysis to support figuring out what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the cool things too about tracking those efficiency metrics is even if your cost is going up, say, it's Prime Day or Netflix has a huge release or, something like that. Mm-hmm. You can, if your efficiency is getting better, you can backwards out how much you saved, right? So if you had saved if you had scaled this much, but stayed at that previous efficiency, it would have been X more expensive.
Absolutely. And again, that it provides a richness of context, both from a financial perspective and from an engineering efficiency perspective. And what you stated about the financial viewpoint is awesome. When you break down your AWS services in terms of your unit cost, EC2 cost per customer, S3 cost per customer, EBS cost per customer, and so on and so forth, you can determine which of your services, in FP&A, financial planning and analysis, you'd call it a sensitivity analysis. Which services are the biggest impacts to my cost? And then you can focus your efforts on efficiency on the things where you're going to get the biggest bang for the buck. But without doing that, running your service cost on a per unit basis and tracking that over time, you're not going to be able to, you're just going to guess. And why guess when we can make data-driven decisions?
Definitely. Just to chime in as well, for those of us who have just joined us, we are chatting about unit cost today. So any questions, anything you want us to cover, please chuck that in the chat, let us know, or let us know how you measure unit cost, if you've got a different way of doing it, or if you have any good stories about things that you've done. We'd really like to hear those. So I think you guys have kind of touched on this a little bit, but have you got any really good success stories of people that have done this really well and they've been able to track kind of optimization, so bring it back to kind of the main subject matter, how they've been able to save money and kind of showcase that through unit cost?
Oh, I have one very large customer there. They spend a tremendous amount of money on AWS, and they made the commitment several years ago to go all in on AWS, which we appreciate very much. But they were just looking at the raw bill every month, and it kept going up and going up. And part of that is because they were migrating more, but they didn't understand what their gross margin was for one particular service, their largest. And and they were actually the reason why I started being more formal about developing materials and a series of blog posts and things regarding unit costs. Showed them how to measure that specific service, their largest one, in terms of their cost per, and I'll speak generically, cost per scan. And when they started measuring things in terms of cost per scan, they could see the volume impacts by signing more customers, and they could see the efficiency impacts by, engaging in better engineering practices. And they were able to have, and probably the biggest benefit they got in the short term, it took them off the defensive when being asked the question, why is my bill going up? Our bill's going up because we're running more customers through, and we're increasing, and simultaneously, not only are we running more customers through, our cost per is going down, so we're actually expanding our gross margin and creating more profit for the organization. And that's the kind of richness that a unit cost can give you. And first and foremost, it takes you off the defensive. Secondly, it gives you data-driven points to determine if you're making good decisions. It also serves as a way, I call these oops bills, those bills that kind of happen, and when you get your bill and you're like, oh my dear, it is the 13th of May and I've consumed my budget through October and the CIO is gonna, come after me. If you're measuring your unit costs well and you're tracking your systems that you have, if you can get down to daily granularity, you can get well in front of a cost spike and not wait for that bill and be totally reactive. And that's just another benefit you can have. Your monitoring and your ability to glean good data to make good decisions is, costs run about a day behind. So you're basically a day away from being able to understand if you're moving in the right direction or the wrong direction versus checking it 12 times a year when the invoice comes in.
You've hit on something interesting that I want to dive into a little bit of. So this, essentially you would think that if you had more users or whatever you've tied that unit to, that it's going to tie also back to your revenue, right? So where do you make that link of, okay, your unit cost is getting better, but you can't just look at the AWS bill, right? You've got to see how those revenue metrics or numbers are coming in as well, because essentially you want it to make you more money in the end.
Right. Well, you can actually, I'll answer that question a couple of different, from a couple of different viewpoints. Well, one, you're focused on as a product owner and as a technical, I'll call architects, our developers and our DevOps folks, collectively, I'll refer to them as engineers. Your engineers need to make good technical choices and they need to make good fiscal choices. And if you can demonstrate you're expanding your gross margin, improving that overall profit margin for the product, you're contributing your share to the organization. I always leave revenue to sales and marketing. But if you can show that you're expanding that spread between what the service is selling for and what it costs me to operate that service, and you can make that larger over time, you are a fantastic, cost-effective and cost-efficient engineer. And that's really an important aspect to be able to track, because there are certain situations where it's okay to raise the unit cost. And the three that come top of mind are if you fix a bug, your system was operating incorrectly and you fix it, and perhaps that cost per customer per month goes up a little bit. Well, that's the cost of doing business. If you have to implement a regulatory requirement, especially if you're governed by GDPR, you have HIPAA data, PCI data if you're in the credit card industry and what have you. The rules change. It's the cost of doing business. And then the third is if you're laying out new infrastructure for future features, functions, and capabilities. And this is where it ties back to the second point with revenue. If you know what the cost of delivering a new feature is, and marketing has told you it's going to generate this much business, you now have the cost, the incremental cost to track, and you should be able to track the incremental revenue with the ad campaign or other marketing efforts to drive that business. Then you can determine, this is what else it brought me, and this is what it costs to bring it in. Is it worth it? Because now you can have a data-driven decision on, that's maybe not as good as we thought it was going to be. We should roll that back because it costs too much. Or, hey, let's do more of this. This was a great decision. The other reason to roll out infrastructure, or not infrastructure, but more features, functions, and capabilities through infrastructure rollout is you may want to reduce customer churn. So now you can tie the cost of your efforts to reduce that churn and then measure it against that system you have in place that is counting your customers or events or transactions. But then nobody's guessing, because everybody feels like they're doing a great job, which is different from knowing you're doing a great job.
Great point. So just to shout out again, if anybody has used unit cost in their businesses, then please let us know what you guys have done. We want to hear. Let's think about.
If I can interrupt you real quick.
Yeah.
Head of Twitch put in the chat there, it's important to make the unit cost visible, not just to leadership. Yes, everybody, engineers, marketing, sales, finance, everybody in the organization should know if you're rowing in the right direction.
Yeah.
As it relates to cost. It should be something that everybody understands. Everyone should know how it's calculated, and everybody should know how their role in the organization can move it in the right direction. That is super
You literally
key.
Took the words out of my mouth. I was just going to ask you guys who needs to know about this and who needs to do it. You took my question there.
Well,
but it's great. It's great.
Steph, I'm going to bring in something you and I talked about earlier this week, and interested to hear Mike's perspective here. Something that Steph and I get asked a lot about when we're talking to some of our customers on unit costs is, number one, what does good look like, and benchmarking. So what is your response when, maybe they want to know, is this a normal unit cost to have? Where does this stand? How does this benchmark? How do you approach those questions?
I approach it simply that it's different for everyone. Your unit costs are a function of your architectural decisions, the way your developers write that code and stand up your services, and how well you operate your systems. So it's literally different for every single customer because everybody's approaching it, solving even the same problems from a different perspective. The other piece is there's a lot of opaqueness there. When I was a customer, our cost per servicing a customer, that was secret sauce. We don't share that with anybody outside of the organization. And I think we're going to be very hard pressed to find people sharing, especially in the same industry, what it takes for you to do X as compared to your competitor doing at a cost of Y. And people just aren't forthcoming and sharing that data, but I understand why they're not. That's, being a low cost, high margin provider is a competitive advantage, and you don't want to tip your hand to anybody. So it's super hard to get that data, especially in any kind of industry segment.
Great. So we've talked a lot about kind of high level, lots of intricate bits, lots of stories. So what would be your kind of call to action, and how do people get started with this? So someone's heard about it today and they want to go and do it for their business. They want to figure out a unit cost. What would be like a good starting point for them?
Well, one, in the perfect world, you have a company that does one thing. What is that thing you do? And you should intuitively know, when I do more of this, my AWS bill should increase because I'm doing more volume. And when I do less of it, that volume should be shrinking. And you want to look at it at a line of business or at a product level, and just it should be very straightforward based upon what you do. If it seems complex, break down that line of business into its parts, like the example we gave earlier: cost to list, cost to search, cost to book. Then this is where I say, go buy your favorite actuary or data science person lunch, or their favorite form of caffeine, and do the math. Can you mathematically demonstrate my driver has a high correlation? Which means before you do that, you've got to grab your cost and usage history data, because you want to be able to, like in Cost Explorer, you've got the prior 12 months. Do you have those drivers for those same periods? And can you line them up with each other? If you're new to creating drivers and new to counting drivers, my first step would be, this is a thing we think is going to work. Let's build a system, a book of record, as it would be known formally, to count these things. And then let's test the counts over the periods against my cost and usage data and see if we have a high correlation. That would be step number one.
Great. And I'm going to share in the chat. We have we love our well-architected labs. So we have a lab for the efficiency workload, which is a 200 lab, which you can check out, which is a great starting point for people that are new to it. What about you, Alex? Any tips for getting started?
My biggest tip would be to start small, right? You're not gonna find the entire company's unit cost in your first go round. So look at what you do on a day-to-day basis, and you can relate it to anything, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be revenue driven just to get you used to the unit cost. So, think of in terms of this workload that I have, how do I say it's successful? What makes the business happy, and then reverse that into the unit cost. But while you're getting started, always remember to report that progress as in that format of cost savings, right? That's even if you saved your company $15, like that's a couple more coffees someone's going to get. So remember to share your wins, right? And that gets other people excited and collaborating. Definitely. And of course, lean on some of your AWS team. We love a new challenge to figure out where we can find unit costs in different places. I'd love to, in the chat too, if anyone has tracked a certain efficiency unit cost just within AWS, not bringing in that extra data source yet, I'd love to hear what it is. I had mentioned, storage and compute are big ones for us, but love seeing how people get creative there.
Right.
And you can always tweet us as well if you want to
right.
afterwards.
And another thing,
Go on,
I use unit cost as a teaching opportunity for engineers and other folks as well. And I called this, when I was a customer, pennies and paychecks. When you express your cost in terms of it's a fraction of a penny that we saved, yeah, people look at that and it's no big deal. And a specific example is we had a Cassandra stack, and we shaved 0.2 of a penny per customer per month off the operating cost of running that Cassandra stack. At scale, that was $473,000 a year. So you want people to appreciate little tiny adjustments at an individual unit level, depending on your scale, can have wonderful and massive financial impact in a good way. And it's hard for people to see, oh yeah, I just shaved a tenth of a cent off my EC2 cost per hour or cost per customer. But if you're processing tens of millions of customers and using hundreds of thousands or millions of hours a month, that's a big deal. For us, a penny an hour on EC2, again, when I was a customer, was a low six-figure a year savings.
Oh.
And the other thing is you can use it, especially when it comes to the sensitivity analysis. We tracked gigabytes per customer per month rigorously because we had an app that operated on the phone, and it was all back-ended on the AWS cloud. So if we could shrink the number of gigabytes per customer per month, we use less of the customer's battery, less of their data plan. Our data backhaul charges went down. Our ingestion process went faster. And since we were in a regulated industry, our storage footprint shrank, and we had to keep that data for at least 7 years. Yeah. So knowing your systems and knowing to be able to cost those systems will help you make some great decisions.
Great. So I'm just going to throw up a question that we've had. So a little bit off of the unit, but many of the AWS tools have support features for optimizing these things as a user. How much should you rely on those supportive algorithms? I assume that's short for. Mike, do you want to take that?
Well, I'm going to take a guess, and that maybe the person is asking about the the AWS Compute Optimizer and the recommendation and function inside of Cost Explorer.
Yeah, let's go with that.
I always have to take that with a grain of salt, because at the core of all your decisions are, what is my workload and how does my workload need to operate? And you don't have that context when you're looking at, hey, you should, the recommendation engine says you should go from an M5 2XL to an M5 XL. Well, what's working on that? The other context it doesn't have is there's just more parameters besides CPU utilization. There's network I/O, disk I/O, and memory utilization as well, which if you're in the weeds, you have to put a CloudWatch agent or other mechanism on your EC2 to capture that memory utilization. So understanding the workload, and this kind of comes full circle in, you need to understand your workload. You need a definition of what is good for your workload, because too slow causes customer irritation, and too much or too fast will crush your profit margins. So you need to find that balance, and then instrument your observability or observation features to say, is my workload running within the range that I deem is not going to upset my customers and is not going to break the bank? And then how do you adjust if you get to the low side so you can avoid upsetting customers? And how do you adjust to not break the bank? And you have to code for that, and that's no simple feat.
Great. All right, we have 2 minutes left. So how about we have one kind of top tip from both of you on kind of anything to do with unit cost, anything you want to kind of share with people to make sure that they know before they leave this session?
I think you mentioned earlier, don't boil the ocean. Start small, start with one product or even a segment within a product, and build a system to what I like to call toll. Count those units, and then marry that data up with your cost and usage data and determine if you have a good correlation coefficient for that system. And if you do, move forward.
Nice. Alex?
Yeah, mine would be very similar. Don't boil the ocean. And there's so many materials out there and blog posts, and Mike just released a newest one. Go read it, gather the context. There's no one size fit all for this, but there's also no downside to doing this, right? It's just going to give you more insights and the ability to make more data-driven decisions.
Awesome. All right. Thank you both for joining us. Next week, we have Aaron coming on to talk about the Kudos dashboard, which will be exciting. But thanks again, and we will see you all next week.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.